It started on a day when the rain seemed endless, soaking every leaf, every sidewalk, every inch of my quiet world. The gray light pressed against my windows, and the air in the house felt cool and still. I had grown used to the emptiness, the echo of my own footsteps across wooden floors, the measured predictability of solitude. Even the way the water traced lines down the glass felt familiar. That afternoon I sat at the kitchen table, half listening to the storm, letting my thoughts drift, unhurried and circular. There was a comfort in knowing nothing would disturb this peace. And then, suddenly, there was a knock at the door, a sharp, unexpected interruption that sliced through the dull rhythm of the rain and sent a ripple through the quiet. I hesitated for a moment, not wanting to leave the warmth, but the insistence of the sound pushed me to my feet. When I opened the door, I saw her standing on the porch, hair plastered to her forehead, rain streaming down her cheeks. She was young, though not a girl, with a tired expression and eyes that held something urgent beneath their calm. Her clothes clung to her, soaked through, and she hugged a bundle of soggy papers to her chest as if they mattered more than her own comfort. The water from her jacket dripped onto the doormat, pooling around her shoes. There was a tension in her posture, a determination that seemed out of place against the vulnerability of her situation. I stepped aside and let her enter, watching as she moved carefully across the threshold, as if unsure whether she truly belonged there. The scent of rain filled the hallway, earthy and sharp, mingling with the distant aroma of coffee. She paused, brushing a strand of wet hair from her face, and glanced around with cautious curiosity. Every detail of her seemed heightened in that moment, the curve of her jaw, the pinkness in her cheeks, the way her fingers gripped her stack of pamphlets as if afraid they might dissolve in her hands. The door closed behind us, muffling the roar of the rain, and the house felt suddenly smaller, charged with a new and unfamiliar energy. I took in her presence, her discomfort, her determination, her youthful uncertainty. My thoughts, once slow and predictable, quickened and scattered in her wake. She brought with her a gust of something I hadn't realized I was missing, a flicker of possibility that unsettled the careful balance of my life. As she stood dripping on the rug, water sliding down her arms, I sensed that nothing in my world would remain unchanged after this moment. I moved through the motions of hospitality on instinct, letting routine guide my hands while my mind lagged a step behind. I reached for the kettle, filled it with water, and set it to boil, all the while aware of her presence in my kitchen. She stood by the counter, dripping and uncertain, holding those crumpled pamphlets as though they offered her shelter. The silence was filled with small sounds, the rattle of teacups, the patter of water droplets falling from her sleeves onto the tiled floor, the distant percussion of rain against the windows. I watched as she carefully placed her papers on a dish towel, trying to smooth them out with her fingers, her brow furrowed with gentle frustration and intent. The vulnerability in that gesture pulled at something inside me, and I found myself wanting to comfort her, to provide more than warmth or shelter, to offer understanding. Steam began to curl from the spout of the kettle, filling the room with a humid softness. I poured the water over 2 bags of tea, watching the colors swirl and deepen in the cups. The simplicity of the act, the making of tea, the sharing of warmth, felt suddenly intimate. She accepted the cup with both hands, fingers trembling, wrapping herself around the heat as if gathering courage from it. I noticed the way her eyes darted around the room, taking in the modest details of my life, searching for clues to who I was. Her damp hair clung to her neck and forehead, and her cheeks were flushed, whether from the cold or from the strangeness of this encounter, I couldn't be sure. She began to talk, her words tumbling out in uneven waves, explaining her purpose, her mission, her hope to bring a message to anyone willing to listen. I nodded, mostly letting her voice flow around me, only half listening to the details of her faith and convictions. What held my attention was the earnestness in her expression, the quiet effort to connect despite her obvious discomfort, the way her voice softened and strengthened in turns. I watched her cradle the mug, shoulders gradually relaxing as the tea warmed her from the inside out. There was a gentleness to her, a kind of resilience beneath the surface, as if she'd learned to endure the world's indifference through sheer will and belief. The rain continued, drumming steadily against the roof, making our small island of warmth feel even more enclosed. The tea cooled slowly between us, and I became aware of how close we were standing in the narrow kitchen, the accidental brush of her arm against mine as she reached for the sugar. There was a sense that something fragile was being built in that moment, an unspoken understanding, a tentative trust. I realized how rare it was to share this kind of quiet with another person, to feel the layers of caution slowly dissolving as we moved through ordinary rituals. In her presence, I sensed the possibility of something unexpected, something neither of us had planned for, unfolding quietly over 2 cups of tea as the rain softened the world outside. The afternoon slipped into evening without my noticing, the rain refusing to let up, as if it wanted to keep us inside together a little longer. I offered her dry clothes, and she accepted, almost shyly, holding the borrowed things to her chest as she disappeared down the hall. When she returned, wearing a sweater that hung loosely on her shoulders and a pair of old sweatpants rolled at the ankles, something inside me tightened. The lines of her figure softened beneath the fabric, but the intimacy of the gesture, my clothes on her skin, felt more intimate than bare flesh. I caught myself watching the way her hands trembled as she tried to smooth her hair, the way her gaze flickered uncertainly between the floor and my eyes, as if unsure what was allowed now that she had crossed into my private world. Later, she stood in the doorway, clutching her damp shirt, asking if I had a place to hang it. The fabric clung to her hands, water still dripping onto the floor, and as she held it out to me, her fingers brushed mine. The touch was fleeting, accidental, but the spark it sent through my body was sharp and electric. I reached for the shirt, and for a moment, our hands lingered together, neither of us willing to let go first. The air seemed to change between us, charged, uncertain, waiting for someone to make the next move. I took the shirt and hung it carefully in the laundry room, aware of her standing behind me, close enough to sense her warmth. My heart pounded in my chest, a mix of anticipation and fear. I could feel her watching me, and when I turned around, our eyes met for a long moment. I was keenly aware of every sound in the house, the hum of the refrigerator, the patter of rain, the silence that had settled between us. I felt exposed, as if she could see straight through to the part of me that wanted something I hadn't dared to name in years. She stepped forward, hesitant but determined, her arms crossing over her chest as though to protect herself, but her posture suggested she didn't really want to hide. I closed the distance between us, drawn in by the magnetic pull of her uncertainty and need. When our bodies finally touched, subtle at first, then bolder, it was as if a boundary had dissolved, leaving us raw and unguarded. I felt the heat of her skin through the thin sweater, the rise and fall of her breath, the shiver that ran through her at my touch. Everything else faded away, the world, the rules, the expectations that had governed my life for so long. In that moment, there was only the sensation of her lips brushing mine, tentative, questioning, tasting the forbidden. The kiss was soft, searching, but quickly deepened into something hungry and necessary, a release of longing held in check for too long. My hands found her waist, her back, the curve of her neck, learning the new language of her body. She melted against me, her restraint crumbling as she pressed closer, her breath warm against my cheek. We moved together slowly, each gesture uncertain but hopeful, as if afraid that the spell would break if we rushed. I reveled in the taste of her mouth, the feeling of her fingers gripping my arms, the way she whispered my name without sound. The room seemed to close in around us, holding us in a cocoon of heat and secrecy. The flavor of the forbidden was intoxicating, sweet, sharp, dangerous. Every nerve in my body came alive beneath her touch, every fear dissolving into the shared rhythm of bodies coming together in the quiet hush of the storm. Nothing else mattered but the two of us, lost in the thrill of crossing a line neither of us would ever forget. Night settled gently over the house, draping everything in velvet shadows and muffling the sounds of the storm to a distant hum. The world outside faded to a blur of rain streaked across dark windows, while inside, the air vibrated with the aftershocks of what we had just shared. I could feel her presence beside me, the warmth of her skin lingering on my fingertips, the echo of her heartbeat still pulsing through my chest. The lamp on the bedside table cast a soft, golden light that touched the edges of the room, making the space between us feel impossibly intimate. We lay on top of the tangled sheets, limbs half draped over one another, bodies still slick with the evidence of our closeness. My breath slowed to match hers, each inhale a silent promise, each exhale a quiet surrender to the moment. She rested her head on my shoulder, hair fanned across my collarbone, her breath a steady rhythm against my skin. I traced lazy patterns along her back, marveling at the smoothness of her skin, the way her muscles relaxed under my touch. In that quiet space, words seemed unnecessary, almost disruptive. Everything we needed to say existed in the hush between heartbeats, in the gentle rise and fall of our chests. I pressed my lips to her temple, feeling her shiver softly, and she turned into me, wrapping her arm across my waist with a possessiveness that made me feel cherished and exposed at the same time. The room was thick with the scent of rain and skin, with the memory of our earlier urgency giving way to a softer, more languid desire. I ran my fingers through her damp hair, catching the occasional knot and smoothing it with care, wanting her to know she was safe here, that I would hold her as long as she needed. Her hand moved slowly up my side, fingertips lingering at my ribs, then slipping beneath the edge of my shirt as if to anchor herself to my body. I welcomed the touch, pressing my cheek against the top of her head, feeling her breath grow deeper as sleep began to claim her. Yet I remained awake, my mind wandering through the maze of everything that had led to this night. I thought about the hunger in her eyes, the tremor in her hands, the way her body had opened to mine with equal parts boldness and fear. I let the memories settle into my bones, grateful and astonished that I had allowed myself to be this close to another soul. As her breathing grew slower, heavier, she curled closer, one leg thrown over mine, her bare foot resting against my calf, a final act of trust and need. I watched her sleep, bathed in golden lamplight, and I realized how utterly changed I was by her nearness. The storm outside continued its endless song, but inside our small sanctuary, time seemed suspended. I closed my eyes, finally surrendering to the pull of exhaustion, and let her steady breath carry me gently into sleep. The last thing I felt was her body pressed against mine, her heartbeat echoing beneath my hand, and the quiet certainty that nothing would ever be the same again. Morning crept into the room with a diffused gray light, softening the sharp edges of reality and casting everything in a gentle haze. I woke to the sound of distant rain tapping at the window, a persistent whisper that seemed far away from the warmth beneath the blankets. My body was heavy, limbs tangled with hers, skin still humming with the memory of the night before. For a moment I lay completely still, unwilling to disturb the fragile peace that hovered between us. Her head was tucked against my shoulder, her arm draped over my waist, and I could feel her steady breath tickling the hollow of my neck. The world outside our little cocoon did not exist, and I wanted desperately to keep it that way, at least for a few moments longer. I watched her sleep, studying the delicate line of her jaw, the gentle flutter of her eyelashes, the way her lips parted in silent dreams. Her hair fanned out over the pillow, catching the morning light in strands of copper and gold. My hand drifted to her back, fingertips tracing small, absent-minded circles just below her shoulder blade, relishing the feel of soft skin beneath my palm. I felt a quiet ache inside me, a mixture of tenderness and disbelief, wonder and fear, realizing how deeply she had unsettled me, how quickly this stranger had become the axis around which my thoughts now spun. Eventually she stirred, pulling herself closer to me in her sleep, murmuring something that dissolved into the space between us. The intimacy of the gesture both thrilled and unsettled me. The boundaries that once seemed so unbreakable were now hopelessly blurred. I closed my eyes and tried to capture the details of this new reality, letting them sink into memory, The weight of her body pressed against mine, the heat radiating from her bare skin, the sweet smell of her hair mingled with the faint aroma of rain and sweat and sleep. But slowly, as the light grew stronger, the world began to intrude. I became aware of the ordinary sounds of the house, the ticking of the clock in the hallway, the creak of old floorboards expanding as they warmed, the gentle hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen. Each noise chipped away at the perfect stillness, reminding me that this was no dream, that soon we would have to re-enter the world outside these walls. I thought of the evening before, of the choices we had made in the hush of the storm, and a wave of uncertainty rolled through me. What would this mean now, in the clarity of morning? Was it only a single night stolen from loneliness, or the beginning of something neither of us could yet name? I slipped out of bed carefully, not wanting to wake her, and wrapped myself in a robe. Standing by the window, I pressed my forehead to the glass and watched the world beyond. The rain had softened to a mist, leaving the street slick and shining. Everything seemed strangely new, as if the neighborhood had shifted imperceptibly overnight. I caught my own reflection, eyes wide and uncertain, and hardly recognized the person looking back at me. There was something softer in my face, a rawness in my expression that spoke of vulnerability and hope and a lingering edge of fear. After a while, I heard the rustle of blankets behind me. She sat up, hair tousled, eyes still heavy with sleep. She watched me for a long moment, a silent question in her gaze, but I only smiled, letting her see my uncertainty and my gratitude all at once. We moved through the motions of breakfast like sleepwalkers, cautious and quiet, the silence between us dense but not uncomfortable. I noticed the way she lingered near me, the way her hand brushed mine when we reached for the same spoon, the way her bare feet patted softly across the kitchen floor. There was a gentleness in our movements, an unspoken promise that whatever we had found together in the darkness would not vanish with the dawn. After breakfast, we found ourselves on the sofa, wrapped in a blanket, bodies pressed together in a loose embrace. She rested her head on my chest, listening to the steady beat of my heart. The world seemed far away, the only reality the slow rhythm of our breathing, the warmth of skin against skin, the quiet reassurance that comes with simple, wordless closeness. I closed my eyes and let myself drift, no longer afraid of what might come next, grateful for the gift of her presence. Later, we wandered through the house, picking up the scattered pieces of clothing from the night before, laughing softly at the evidence of our shared carelessness. There was a sweetness to these small tasks, a sense of partnership that felt both new and oddly inevitable. We folded laundry, wiped crumbs from the table, refilled the tea kettle, all while exchanging shy smiles and glances that lingered a heartbeat too long. Every ordinary act seemed transformed, colored by the memory of bare skin and whispered longing. At midday, the rain finally stopped, and sunlight spilled through the windows, catching dust motes in golden suspension. We opened the back door, stepping onto the porch, feeling the cool, damp air against our faces. She reached for my hand, entwining her fingers with mine, and together we watched the world glisten with the promise of new beginnings. For a moment, I allowed myself to imagine a future not defined by regret or shame, but by the quiet joy of mornings like this, where love grows quietly, persistently, in the shelter of a storm that has finally passed. The day went on, ordinary in its tasks but extraordinary in the way we moved through it together. Every glance, every smile, every brush of fingertips became a language all its own. I didn't know what would come next, didn't know if courage would hold or doubts would resurface, but I knew I wanted to keep reaching for her, to keep letting this new, fragile happiness take root. And as evening approached again, I realized I had been changed, not by fear or by longing, but by the simple, profound act of letting someone in. The hours of that day unfolded slowly, heavy with unspoken questions and gentle touches. I found myself watching her constantly, memorizing her every gesture, as if I could imprint the feeling of her presence on my mind before it slipped away. The afterglow of the night before lingered between us, fragile and shimmering, both of us aware that the world would soon demand answers we hadn't yet found. As afternoon light slanted through the windows, painting golden stripes across the floor, I felt a growing restlessness in my chest, a low ache, equal parts hope and dread. I kept moving through the motions of daily life, folding sheets, rinsing plates, arranging books back on their shelves. Each small task felt suspended between past and future, colored by the weight of decisions yet to be made. She moved through the house with a strange mix of ease and uncertainty, picking up her pamphlets from where she had left them to dry, sorting through her bag, checking her phone. I could see her mind turning, questions flickering behind her quiet smile. We exchanged glances that spoke of things neither of us dared voice aloud. I wanted to tell her to stay, to abandon her mission and everything that had brought her to my door, to build a new world from this small circle of warmth and possibility we had found. Yet I could not ask her for that, not when I knew how deeply rooted her purpose was, how much she believed in the path she had chosen before me. The weight of responsibility pressed down on me, the knowledge that she was young, searching, trying to do good in a world so often indifferent or cruel. I feared being the reason she strayed from something important, and yet the thought of letting her walk out of my life left me feeling hollow and shaken. I watched as she carefully packed her things, folding her still damp shirt, gathering her notes, preparing herself to leave. The air between us thickened with a quiet tension. I stood by the window, arms folded, staring out at the street as people passed in pairs and small groups, umbrellas blooming against the lingering drizzle. I wondered if any of them knew how quickly a life could change, how a single encounter could reroute the current of desire and longing so completely. She joined me by the window, and for a long time we stood side by side, hands nearly touching, neither of us saying a word. The silence felt dense with possibility, a waiting space where everything could shift with a single breath. I wanted to reach for her, to pull her close and promise that I would carry her doubts as well as my own, that we could find a way forward together, whatever it cost. Instead, I stayed still, letting the longing radiate from me in waves, hoping she could feel what I could not say. Her fingers grazed mine, tentative and trembling. I could sense the storm inside her, the struggle between conviction and desire, between duty and the thrill of discovery. I realized, with a clarity that felt both devastating and beautiful, that true love is never about possession or certainty, it is about giving someone the freedom to choose. Eventually, the time came for her to go. She slipped on her shoes, slung her bag over her shoulder, and glanced back at me with a mixture of sorrow and gratitude in her eyes. I walked her to the door, heart pounding, every step measured and slow. At the threshold, she paused, the air electric between us, as if the entire world held its breath. I reached out, brushing a lock of hair from her forehead, memorizing the softness of her skin, the warmth of her gaze. For a moment, it felt as though the universe contracted to a single point, the choice suspended, shimmering, not yet made. And then, with a final lingering look, she stepped outside into the cool afternoon, the door closing gently behind her. I stood there in the silence that followed, pulse roaring in my ears, the emptiness of the house blooming out around me. I walked through each room slowly, touching the places where she had lingered, breathing in the faint trace of her perfume, the memory of her laughter. The house felt both larger and smaller at once, expansive with loss, intimate with the echoes of her presence. As dusk fell, I lit a candle and sat by the window, watching the sky fade from blue to violet, letting the ache inside me settle into something softer. I realized that the choice was never truly about keeping or letting go. It was about accepting what had been given, no matter how brief, and allowing it to change me. I understood now that some loves are meant to awaken us, to remind us of our own longing and our capacity for courage. I did not know if she would return, if our paths would ever cross again, or if this would remain a single, perfect constellation in the story of my life. But as the candle flickered and the first stars appeared, I felt something close to peace. I had chosen to let her go, not because I wanted to lose her, but because I wanted her to have the freedom to find her own truth. And in that letting go, I found a quiet strength I had not known I possessed, a sense that, whatever came next, I was more alive, more honest, more open than I had been in years. As the night deepened, I closed my eyes and breathed in the lingering scent of rain, holding close the memory of her breath beside mine, and allowed myself, finally, to hope.